Our theme for the camp meeting is a revelation of Jesus Christ. And so far, the messages we have looked at have in one way or another focused on God revealing himself in different ways, and especially through his son Jesus Christ. And I think that's going to be the theme. I think if we understand Christianity, you will never go to any subject where you do not see that this is a further revealing of God in his son Jesus. Now I'm going to touch on maybe a strange topic, right? Maybe strange in the context of the theme of the camp meeting, but I believe that it also has something to do with understanding God, understanding Jesus. And I'd like to put it there in this presentation. I'm going to talk about superstition. Superstition. I know we're all familiar with superstition. Well, many different superstitious practices. I know here in Jamaica, you have a lot. When I was a boy, they told me that if you go outside at night and you are going to throw something away in the dark, or you're going to throw away water, you must say, stranger, stranger, move yourself. Right? And if you don't say this, something bad can happen. Stranger, stranger, move yourself, then you throw it out. If you don't, you can get into problems. One popular superstition is that if you're walking and you see a black cat cross your path, you have to go somewhere else. Don't allow a black cat to cross your path, otherwise you're going to get into a lot of bad luck. Another superstition, I'll just mention a few, is that, well, most of us know, I've heard of this guy, even if you're not a Jamaican, you probably heard of Usain Bolt. He's the fastest man who has ever lived. He's a Jamaican, okay? He has a world record for the 100 meter and the 200 meter, and nobody has come close to his record in the 100 meter. But Bolt is superstitious. Every time before he runs a race, he makes the sign of a cross and points upward and shakes his finger. He never runs without doing that. And a lot of younger athletes have started following his example. They make the cross. And the funny thing is, this guy grew up in an Adventist home, and he's thinking of going back to Adventism. But you know, crossing yourself is a Catholic custom. He picked this up and he does that every time before he runs. Well, he's not running anymore. He retired in 2015. Another strange one involves the game of cricket. In cricket, there is a term that they call Nelson. Those who understand cricket. I know Daniel will follow me, but the rest of you might be a little, I don't know how much you are into cricket. But Nelson means that the score reaches 111. Anytime, they call it Nelson. Anytime you reach 111, something bad is likely to happen. So there was an umpire, like a referee, his name was Dickie Bird. Anytime it got to 111, whichever side was playing, he started standing on one foot. Because if you stand on 2 feet when it's at Nelson, something bad will happen. So you could see it on the TV. Anytime the score got to 111, Dickie Bird would start standing on 1 foot. He's the umpire standing there on 1 foot. And he wouldn't stop doing it until they scored a run and moved from 111. I'll mention one more. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Jim Corbett. You probably don't, because you don't have my taste in reading. But Jim Corbett was the greatest hunter, in my opinion. He was a hunter of tigers, leopards. He hunted man-eating tigers and man-eating leopards. If you are interested in reading and you want a good read, you can get hold of a book called Man-Eaters of Kuman by Jim Corbett. Gripping stories. Even till today, I still read them. And I don't have much time for much reading other than the Bible these days. But I still listen to Corbett now and then because his writing is so interesting. And the stories of these man-eaters. But Corbett was superstitious too. He said he could never kill one of these man-eaters unless he killed a snake first. If he didn't kill a snake, he couldn't kill the animal. And he said he would be hunting for days and he couldn't come to grips with this man-eater until he killed a snake. So he had that superstition. And you know, people have these superstitions. Some carry around crucifixes. They have it around their neck. You see it all the time. They believe that they will bring good luck. And they have talismans. Some have little bags that they carry that have little things inside of them. And we know that these are superstitions. But what exactly is a superstition? Do you know that there is, I found blatant superstition in the Bible? Well, not exactly in the Bible. In the Catholic Bible. Because you probably may not know, some may know, some don't, that the Catholic version of the Bible has 14 books that we don't have. It used to be a part of what was called the Bible, but in the time of the Reformation, I believe, the Reformers took out those 14 books, and they would not allow them because they said these books are not in harmony with the rest of Scripture. So the Reformers took it out. So when you talk about how the Bible came together and what they call the canon of Scripture, it's kind of not as simple as we think. Because you would say, men took out those 14 books. But then you'd ask the question, which men put them in at the beginning? These 14 books are a part of what is called the Apocrypha. And I find it interesting because a lot of people these days are saying we must read the Apocrypha. They even said, Ellen White said it was a hidden book. And there's some secret in these hidden books that we're supposed to get some light out of at the end of time. I don't know. There's a statement where she's supposed to have said something like this. And so a lot of people are saying, yeah, go to the Apocrypha. But I'm going to read something from the Apocrypha. And you tell me what you think about this. Or you don't have to, but I just ask you to consider it. It's from a book called Tobias. And it has a man in there named Tobit. And in the story, there's a young woman, and she has been married 7 times. But she has not been able to consummate the marriage because there's a demon who loves her. And every time she gets married, the demon kills the husband the night of the wedding. She's been married 7 times, and the demon kills the husband the 7 times. Never been able to consummate the marriage. So this young man now encounters an angel. It says, the angel tells him to go and catch a fish, and he's to take out the heart and the liver and the gall of the fish and to preserve it. Then the young man said to the angel, this is Tobias 6, verses 6 to 8. Then the young man said to the angel, Brother Azarias, to what use is the heart and the liver and the gall of the fish? And he said unto him, touching the heart and the liver, if a devil or an evil spirit trouble any, we must make a smoke thereof before the man or the woman, and the party shall be no more vexed. As for the gall, it is good to anoint a man that hath whiteness in his eyes, and he shall be healed. Tobias' father lay down to sleep one night, and some birds messed in his eye, and his eye got blind. It developed some whiteness over it, according to the story. So he has 2 problems. One is this woman whose husbands are being killed by demons, and the other one is his father, who has this whiteness. And the angel tells him that the fish, gall, and heart and liver, is good to drive away demons and to take whiteness out of your eyes. Now this young man finally has the opportunity to marry this young lady, and the parents are distraught because they are sure he's going to die, and everybody says he's mad. But the angel tells him, I think his name was Azarias was the name of this angel, and when thou shalt come into the marriage chamber, thou shalt take the ashes of perfume and shalt lay upon them some of the heart and the liver of the fish, and shalt make a smoke with it, and the devil shall smell it and flee away and never come again anymore. It's a nice way to get rid of demons. And as he went, he remembered the words of Raphael. Raphael was the angel. And he took the ashes of the perfume and put the heart and the liver of the fish thereupon and made a smoke therewith. The which smell, when the evil spirit had smelled, he fled into the utmost parts of Egypt, and the angel bound him. All right. I think you will understand why the reformers took this out of the Bible. But I think you will also wonder why the Catholics believe that this is inspired. And why a lot of people are saying the Apocrypha is inspired. Something is wrong with the way people understand God and the ways of God, because somebody said this sounds like Obia. Obia is witchcraft, Jamaican witchcraft. I agree completely, and if you don't agree, then I hope, maybe we need to talk. Because you ask yourself, is this God's method of working? This is superstition. And if you ask me what is superstition, I'm going to give you a definition. I didn't look in the dictionary. But based on my understanding of superstition, I'm going to give you a definition. And I want to proceed on that basis. Superstition, in my opinion, it is obtaining spiritual power by a physical method. Think about that and see if you can agree with it. Spiritualism is obtaining or seeking to obtain spiritual power or benefit through physical methods. Fundamentally, it is operating in the physical plane and expecting spiritual benefits. Operating on physical principles and expecting spiritual benefits. I am going to share with you also my understanding that superstition is a close cousin of what we call legalism. It's a close cousin to legalism. So, if you understand what legalism is, you'll understand what I'm saying right away. And if not, hopefully you can understand by the time we come to the end. Now, in Christianity, unfortunately, there's a great deal of superstition. Unfortunately. And it is my hope that as we discuss it this evening, we can even see if in our own lives and in our own approach and our own experience, there are elements of legalism, because legalism is not, let me say superstition, is not harmless. As I mentioned some of these things, as I read the story, all of you feel a little bit amused. Some of you feel a little bit outraged that people can be so in so much darkness. But are there practices and attitudes we have that are relatives of superstition? That's a question, because it's not harmless, and I'm going to explain why it is harmful. Now, Jesus had it to deal with too. Like I said, superstition is a cousin of legalism. Look at what happened. Look at what we read in the Bible. It was there from long ago. It's in the book of Mark, in chapter 7 and verse 3. It says, "For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands oft, eat not." Okay. Recently we had a situation in the world. I'm not going to call a name. I don't want them to take down my video. But they told you, wash your hands oft. Okay? You have to wash your hands every minute. And some of it is still perpetuated. Right? Some places you can't go in, they're still spraying stuff over your hands and insisting that you cover your face. But anyway, the Jews did this. And I suppose it probably started with something good. But it says at the end of the verse, holding the tradition of the elders. If you ask, why did the Jews wash their hands before they ate? Every time, often. They wouldn't tell you that it is because it's hygienic. They probably didn't even understand what they were doing. They were doing it because my father did it, and my grandfather did it, and the elders say we should do it, and that is why I'm doing it. It was mindlessness. They thought that in washing their hands often, they were gaining traction with God. They were gaining spiritual benefit by washing their hands often. And that's why they came to criticize Jesus, because his disciples didn't follow that practice. It's just an example of superstition in Christianity. Well, it wasn't Christianity, in biblical religion then. In the people who were given the oracles of God, they got into this level of superstition. That's what it was. But a lot of this has crept into Christianity today and still exists in Christianity today. I'm going to mention a few things that we can agree on. Then I'm going to creep into some things that we might not see clearly. And then I will move on. But for example, have you ever heard the term the sacred desk? That was probably the first thing that began to bother me about the customs and the habits of the popular church service. I found it strange that the ministers sat up here, and if you were to do an item, you went to a lower tier. And if you were giving a little Sabbath school talk, you stayed on the lower tier. But there's an upper section that only the minister and the elders can go to and sit. And that's where the sermons are preached from, and the rest of you, they will even forgive children running about down here, but not up there. And it was referred to as the sacred desk. It's like one part of the building is sacred, and the rest of the building is not so sacred. And it's extended and perpetuated because every time I came in, I would see a sign at the back of the building, or maybe sometimes at the front, that says, "Reverence my sanctuary." It's an extension of that idea that there are certain places where there is a spiritual presence, and you need to regard this spiritual place made out of wood, stones, bricks, but somehow God is living in this wood and stone and these blocks. And so you have to treat it differently. That was one of the things that I began to question many years ago. The sacred desk, the sacred precincts. Now it's different. I'm not being critical of the idea that when you come to a place of worship, you tell the children, don't run about. I'm not criticizing that. But I think even then we should make the children understand, why don't we do it? It's not because here is holy and out there is not holy. It's because if you treat the place where you worship in a commonplace way, when we come to worship, your mind is in that mode to think you are playing. Right? There's a difference when you do something and you do it for the right reason than when you adopt the wrong concept. So I'm not talking about, the fact that I don't put another book on top of my Bible. It's not because the paper is holier than any other paper, Sister Charlene. It's because whenever I open the Bible, I'm in communication with God, and I want this atmosphere to remain whenever I handle the Bible. I want to immediately have that atmosphere in my mind. It's not because I believe that the paper, and it's like some people believe that if you have a ghost in a house or you meet upon some evil spirit, take out the Bible and flash it, and he has to run away. That is superstition. There's no power in wood and paper. There's no power even in the words, in repeating the words that Jesus said. Satan quoted the Bible. Anybody who thinks that the words of Scripture have power in themselves is deluded. Satan quoted it freely. Words themselves have no power. It is what goes along with the word, which is the faith in the spiritual element of God himself. But people get fixated on the physical. They talk about the sacred desk. Some people talk about a certain calendar that is sacred. It's a sin to use the Gregorian calendar, like we started the year in January 1. But God told the Hebrews that their year would start somewhere around April, March, most years. March, April. But does it mean that it is a sin for you to acknowledge a year starting in January? Is there something sacred about the time itself? That God's blessings are fixated to the time period? Or is that another aspect of superstition? Remember our definition. Superstition is seeking spiritual benefit by operating in physical ways, by using some physical method. And we can go on and go on. People believe in, the Catholics believe in holy water, right? If somebody is having a run of bad luck or their spiritual manifestation, they come and sprinkle the place with holy water. They believe in holy images. The Catholic Church, of course, is famous for this. And I'm not surprised, like I say, that the Catholic Bible has this book of Tobit and the Apocrypha in general inside of it. Catholics are famous for this. They have in Catholic churches, you have what is called relics. If you have never heard of relics, it's interesting. There are about a dozen churches in Europe that claim to have little bits of the cross on which Jesus died. There are about 5 churches that claim to have the Holy Prepuce. You probably never heard what that is. So let me explain what the Holy Prepuce is, right? When they circumcise a child, the bit of skin that comes off is called a prepuce. There are about 5 Catholic churches in Europe that claim to have the Holy Prepuce. They claim to have the piece of circumcision skin from Jesus' circumcision. You find that gross and really crazy, but the point is that people believe in it. They have it in a little glass case, and people go there and they kiss the case, expecting to be blessed. These relics of the cross, they go there and they kneel before them and they bow before them, expecting to be blessed. Gross superstition. Recently, you might have seen another one surfacing, and this one is, in case you have not seen the connection, people are promoting the idea of a holy race. Okay? Now, like I said, superstition is kind of affiliated to legalism. Legalism has to do with the religion of the Old Covenant. In the Old Covenant, God did have a people that He designated a holy race, right? Race of Israel. But when you come to the New Covenant and you move away from legalism and you move away from form and illustration and you come to reality, it's really bad when Christians who should understand start drifting towards that idea of a holy race. And the problem is, it's a lot of people who are my color who are getting into this nonsense. They're saying that God, the black people, are the real Israelites. I mean, there's a group of them called the Hebrew Israelites, yes. But the thing is that their philosophy is drifting over. It's moving over even to people who should know better. They look at history and they look at the fact that there has been so much abuse of black people, and they try to tie some of the prophecies from Deuteronomy to the history of the black people, and so they are trying to make out that there is something special about your skin color. And again, that's another superstition. It's physical identity in claiming spiritual benefit. And that's the foundation of superstition. I mean, you have some practices that kind of drift in that direction, but may not be quite there. Like, for example, the idea of head covering. Women must cover their heads. I don't think I see any of that. And I'm not attacking any lady who covers her head. I'm not doing that. But I'm saying if you think that in doing this, you're obtaining spiritual benefit, or it's a way of obtaining God's favor, you need to reconsider. Because there's nothing physical that you can do that can commend you to God. Because I'm going to come to the verse, of course, and the concept that really clarifies all of this. But I'm just focusing on a few things that a lot of people are confused about. And, even when I talked about sacred names, like the head covering, I'm saying it's not a problem. I don't have a problem with me or anybody else using those names, because I use those names from time to time. But when somebody comes to tell me that it's a way of gaining merit with God, a way of enhancing your relationship with God in terms of obtaining favor from God, I will fight that, because that is superstition. A preference is different from a necessity. When you say it's a necessity, you make it religion. When you say it's a preference, that's your business. But if you say it's a necessity, you have made it into religion, and it's a reflection not just on you or me, it's a reflection on God. You have brought God down to the level of operating in the physical realm in terms of spiritual benefits. And something is wrong there. I'm going to look at a few examples of non-superstitious faith, the principles that the Bible lays down, before I look at the harm in superstition, because there's a harm in it. But examples of non-superstitious faith. Paul says in Romans 14 and verse 14, I know, listen to this, I know and I am persuaded by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself. Let me pause there. What about pork? You know, the Jews had a concept of unclean. A leper was unclean. Eating with unwashed hands was unclean. As a matter of fact, there were many other things that they considered to be unclean. Now, Paul says there is nothing unclean. Is that what he says? He says a little bit more. He says there's nothing unclean of itself. He's looking at a thing may be unclean. It affects you indirectly in another way, but he means in itself. Why does he say there's nothing unclean of itself when the flesh of the pork may be reeking with germs and disease? Why would he say there's nothing unclean of itself? Isn't that unclean? Can't you be hurt and defiled by eating something that will poison your body? Why does he say it's not unclean of itself? It's because there are two kinds of unclean. Again, it comes down to the fact that we are dealing with two different arenas, two different worlds. You have the physical and you have the spiritual. Paul was preeminently a man of the spirit. The new covenant is preeminently religion of the spirit. When it comes to relationship with God and relationship to salvation, don't bring the physical into it. Pork eating in itself has nothing to do with salvation. Eating unclean food in itself has nothing to do with salvation. And if you are at that level in your Christianity, you are operating on the basis of superstition. Physical things cannot add spiritual benefit. Now, how would it matter? It would matter if it now begins to affect your faith. If it becomes a matter of faith, if it affects your relationship to God in some way, then you are operating in the realm of faith. And faith is a thing of the spirit. Food is a thing of the flesh. Faith is a thing of the spirit. There's a distinction that I'd like us to understand. So Paul says, nothing is unclean of itself. By itself, it's not unclean. By itself, there's no problem with it. But listen, but to him that esteems anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. All right, let's take pork as an example again. Pork in itself is not unclean, but if you think it is unclean, it's unclean to you. To you, but not to somebody else. If you think it is unclean, you can't affect the reality that pork is not unclean. You can't reflect it. What happens is that if you think it is unclean, in what way does it become unclean to you? It affects your faith, and therefore it defiles you spiritually, because your faith becomes impure. Your faith becomes infected by the fact that you go against your faith. It's in the same passage that Paul says, whatever is not of faith is sin. Because it reaches you on the level of faith, you think so, you believe so, and you go contrary to what you believe. Now you have gone into the realm of the spirit. So it's not the pork that is unclean to you. It is your acting contrary to your faith that damages you spiritually. You see, it can be a little bit complicated. But if we understand the principle, we can continue to bob and weave and dodge the things that are affecting a lot of people. Let me look at another one. In 1 Corinthians 8 and verse 4, look at what Paul says. As concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. Now, Paul goes on to say that if we are eating food that has been offered to idols, don't worry yourself at all. But he said, if somebody comes along and says, did you know this was offered to idols? What should you do? You should stop. Now, again, it is clear that the problem is not the food. And the problem is not the idol. What is the problem? Your faith. What goes on in the spiritual realm. Food offered to idols is nothing. If Satan even comes and curses this loaf of bread and I eat the bread, can't hurt me. If Satan himself curses it and I eat it, would you be afraid to eat it? Probably we would be, right? But we don't need to be. You don't need to be as a Christian. Satan himself cannot curse you. The only thing that can curse you is your faith or lack of faith. Satan doesn't have the power to make anything hurt you, any object hurt you. It again comes back to the fact that we understand superstition is using physical means to obtain some spiritual benefit, curse, whatever. But it's it's confusing both worlds. Paul says, here's food that has been offered to idols, blessed by idols. Whether it is Baphomet, I hear a lot of talk about Baphomet these days, and how people are becoming involved in the worship of the goat's head, symbol of Satan, and all the things that people practice. There are a lot of devilish practices, but even though we condemn these practices and we avoid them, we need to understand properly, why are we afraid of them? Is it because these things have power to hurt us as Christians? Why don't we observe Easter or Christmas or Halloween? Is there power in these things themselves? According to what Paul is saying, an idol is nothing in the world, and you don't need to be afraid of these things. There's only one God, and that's the God we worship. But when you begin to do something because you believe in it, that's the problem. Paul says, whatever is not of faith is sin. Let me see a couple of other verses that I would use. Colossians 2, verses 20 to 23. Look at what it says here. Colossians chapter 2, verses 20 down to 23. And this probably is one of the strongest verses in this regard. In fact, this is so strong that I had a struggle at first when I was reading this and seeing what it was saying. It says, look here. Wherefore, if you be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why, as though living in the world, are you subject to ordinances? Touch not, taste not, handle not, which are all to perish with the using. Let me pause there. It says, after the commandments and doctrines of men. That is related to verse 20. Because there's a bracketed section. But let's see what he's saying. He says, look here. You died with Christ. Did you? He says, if you died with Christ, what did you die to? You died to the principles of the world. If you died to the principles of the world, why do the practices relating to the physical world still affect how you behave? That's what he's saying. He's saying you are living by the rule, do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. You are living by the rule of things that when you touch them, they perish, they are gone, they are physical things. You are living and running your life on the basis of physical elements when you died to the physical world. That's what he's saying. It's almost a crazy argument, because somebody would say, what, don't we still live in the world? Are we not still flesh and blood? Paul is taking us to a place that is almost fantasy land. Paul is saying, we have risen out of this world. We have died to the world. We don't belong in it. We don't operate in it. So why are you still living by touch not, taste not, handle not? Now, in the context of the passage, I believe he's saying, touch not for a religious reason. Taste not for religious reasons. Handle not for religious reasons. This is what he's criticizing. He's not saying, why don't you go and eat cockroach and scorpion? Right? He's not saying this. Obviously, I mean, you are going to be temperate. Paul himself counsels us to be temperate. We are going to avoid the things that are potentially harmful. But he's talking about doing this thing for a spiritual reason. I remember many years ago, Brother Bill was showing off a little bit and telling me that he went to the, he was passing some mother woman yard, some barnyard, like a female witch doctor. And they have a place that they call the Seal. And he said he went and he walked up and down on the Seal, telling me how he didn't care for that. He went and he walked up and down on the Seal. You're supposed to be cursed if you do something like that. I was amused at the time, but really he was right. He was right. If you as a Christian are afraid of places and physical things, you're not operating on the principles of somebody who died to this world. What Paul is saying is that physical things can't hurt you spiritually. You died to the world and you died to the elements of the world. Why are you still living by these physical limitations? He's trying to get your minds off the old system where everything that you did physically had to be carefully orchestrated, because this was your pathway to God. And he's saying, we are done with this. He says, these things perish after you use them. And to observe these rules is just following the commandments of men. Even if God gave some of these rules in the past, by today they have become men's commandments, because with the coming of Jesus, they're abolished from God's system. Now you're operating on spiritual principles. Now it's men who are pushing these things on you. That's what he's saying. Look what he says in verse 22. Which things have indeed a show of wisdom. That's the point. They have a show of wisdom. They deceive you because they seem to be based on some kind of wisdom. The people who promote this kind of religion, they come with wisdom. They come with arguments. They come with, look here, they can give you scripture till the cows come home. A lot of these scriptures are coming, of course, from the Old Testament. They'll give you scripture. And Paul says there is a show of wisdom. But it is worship that is based on the will. It's willpower. It's based on will worship. It's based on humility. Another version says voluntary humility, which means self-imposed humility. It's not talking about genuine humility. It's good to be humble when it's genuine, but self-imposed humility. It's one of the most distasteful things. There was a boy, when I used to play soccer many years ago, back in my 20s, and he was a real scoundrel. Gave trouble. He was the goalkeeper for our football team, and his ambition, his life ambition, was to break somebody's foot. And he kept trying it in every game we played. But anyway, something happened to him, and overnight, he professed to be a Christian. He would go around, and they would mock him, and he would be as meek as a lamb. But behind it, I didn't sense it. And true to my suspicions, his conversion lasted 3 weeks. Right? At the end of the 3 weeks, he broke out, and he became far worse than he was at the beginning. Some of you know who I'm talking. Well, maybe anybody that age might not be near. My children might know who, because I talk about this fellow all the time. But I mean, I remember once we were playing football, and there was a fellow coming to hit the ball with He was wearing glasses, and he just ran and smashed his hand straight in the fellow's forehead. I just see pieces of the glasses flying all over the place. He was that kind of person. He's actually in jail now in Florida doing life. But anyway, this fellow for those 3 weeks was the humblest person you could find. I mean, the boys on the team, they would mock him afterwards and say, man, when he was changed, he couldn't even mash ants. That's a Jamaican saying, meaning that you were so humble you couldn't even step on an ant. And that's what Paul is saying. He's talking about humility, not real humility, not based on who you know yourself to be, but based on putting on a form. This is what follows this kind of external religion. Now, I'm going to go on and just look. Why is this really harmful? We touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to say a bit more. Why is this really harmful? Suppose somebody wants to believe that covering his head makes him a better Christian or makes him more acceptable to God. Suppose somebody wants to believe that if I don't touch this thing because it has been cursed, I'm better off. Suppose somebody wants to believe, if I believe that my race is special to God. What is the harm in this? Why would you and I need to interfere with that person's religion? Why? Maybe the most outstanding verse in this regard is found in John chapter 4 and verse 24. Let me start from verse 21. Very well-known passage. And I'm sorry, I'm competing with the rain. It's that way whenever the rain falls here. It's a little challenging. So, and I see evidences that everybody's a little bit drunk from the lunch. The post-lunch session is always a little hard. But I won't be too long, I promise you. I'm getting near to the end of what I have to say. This is the experience where Jesus met with the woman at the well. And it's an amazing encounter because as far as I can see in the Bible, this is the only place that Jesus ever said directly to somebody, I am the Messiah. Strange. Because he never told his disciples directly. When the Jews asked him, he never told them. And yet this woman, this foreign woman, this immoral woman, Jesus tells her clearly, I am the Messiah. Now, here's the point of what I'm saying. Jesus says to the woman, the hour is coming, and the hour has now arrived when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. If you break down these statements point by point, each point that is made is amazing. Point number one, let me start at the end. Point number one is that Jesus suggests that God is looking for people to worship him. God is looking for people to enter into a relationship with him, but he's looking for a certain kind of people, not any and everybody. The kind of person that God is looking for is the person who will worship him in a certain kind of way. So what about the others? Well, I'm not going to put it as badly as Spurgeon did, but Spurgeon, there's a verse in the Psalms. There's a verse in the Psalms that says, God knoweth the proud afar off. And Charles Spurgeon said, God knoweth the proud afar off, and he has no desire to know them any closer. So, I'm going to kind of segue off that to say, if God is looking for people to worship him in spirit and in truth, those who don't worship in spirit and in truth, I'm going to put it to you that you could say God is not looking for those people. Because people who don't worship in spirit and in truth are more a hindrance to the cause of God than a benefit to the cause of God. I'm going to stop soon because I can't compete with with the rain. Now, so he goes on to say, God is spirit. See, I just made a symbol. I bet you somebody notices that. My fingers do these crazy things when I'm talking. My finger just did this and I noticed it. Somebody's going to say I'm making Baphomet sign. Fingers behave. God is a spirit. Sorry guys, I can't teach that. It's all right. I can't do it, so I just forget it and let my hands do what they want, right? God is a spirit. The basis of our religion is that God is spirit. Now, if you are dealing with spirit and the sovereign of the universe is spirit, in order to relate to God properly, we have to approach God as God is. We have to approach God as God is to be able to relate to God properly. What Paul is saying is that to have a proper relationship with God, we must approach God on the understanding of the kind of being that we are dealing with. So God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Now, what does it mean to worship in truth, first of all? Most of us are familiar with the answer to this. The converse, or the opposite of worshiping in truth, is not to worship falsely. That's not the opposite. That's a natural response that you think that if it's not true, then it's false. But that's not what it means. The opposite of true in this context is the illustration. The opposite of true is the illustration. Sister Nikki gave out some books to the children this morning. And I was looking at Zane's little book, and it has some illustrations in there. You can look at it and you can see an illustration of a flower. Is it a true flower? Is it a false flower? You wouldn't say it's false, it's illustrative. That's what the religion of the Old Covenant was. It was illustration. Jesus said, those who worship God must stop worshiping in the way of illustration, must stop relating to God in a superstitious or legalistic way. Take account that God is a real person. Take account of the fact that spiritual things are real, and approach God on that basis. In the way of faith, not the way of ceremony and ritualism. You come to church, stand up and you sing the introit, sit down. Pastors come in, stand up again and you sing something, you sit down. Pastors are going out, you stand and sing the doxology. Ceremony, and you are led to believe that following this routine, these physical practices, is the way to obtain favor with God. It's superstition. Worship him in spirit, because God is spirit. Worship him in truth, because God is real. Things that are real, not the forms or the illustrations. Now, the reason why this is harmful is that it provides a way. What does superstition do? Like legalism. I'm going to tell you the real harm in it. Let me go back to the example of Tobias or Tobit. If you have a demon in a house, according to Tobit, the book of Tobias, you need to catch the right fish. Okay? And you need to get the fish's liver and his gall. It was what? The liver and the heart? You need to get a fish's liver and heart, and you have to burn it in the house, and you get rid of demons. Simple. What have you bypassed? You have bypassed God. You have left God out of the picture. And this is a problem with superstition. You get a cross and put around your neck. You make the sign of a cross and you point at the sky. What superstition does It provides a way, or it professes to provide a way where you obtain spiritual benefit by bypassing God. It provides a way for you to get God's benefits without God. That is what it professes to do. And I'm saying to you, whether it is Christian superstition, whether it is mild superstition that it only is a little bit superstitious, the whole foundation problem with superstition, it leads you to seek God or to seek God's benefits by means other than a relationship with God. What I'm saying in this camp meeting, what I tried to say last night, what I will say tomorrow, and what I want to emphasize today is that there is nothing in religious experience that matters except the relationship with God. The living relationship. Right at this moment, we are praying for my sister. I remember when my brother Tony was in the hospital many years ago. You know, his father-in-law came to visit him, Tony said, and he took some foul ointment and rubbed him up. He had, they say it was meningitis. He just collapsed and started vomiting blood, and he lost his mind for about a year. While he was in the hospital, his father-in-law came and said, "This is a bad one," and he went to somebody who gave him some, Tony said it was some foul-smelling liquid, and he rubbed him up with it. He was looking for a cure, but it was a cure. His father-in-law was anything but a Christian. He was far from Christ. He became a Christian in the final days of his life. But at that time, he knew nothing about God, but it's illustrative of what I'm saying. The problem with superstition is that it leads people to seek answers to spiritual problems in physical ways. If you find in your life that you are thinking that it enhances your relationship with God to carry out some physical ritual, I suggest to you that you are walking on dangerous ground. Even the things that are legitimate and good, like fasting and prayer. You know how many people get into fasting and prayer as a ritual? They say, we must fast and pray. Like fasting has a power to move God's hand. Like God is impressed by the fact that you are hungry. Like the physical affliction that you put on yourself is a way of getting God to move his hand. If it's not based upon a reaching for faith, if it's not based upon a way of enhancing your faith, it is vain and foolish. I think I've said enough. Not just because I've basically covered my points, but because my voice is saying, you better stop. So, even though the rain has been giving us a fight, and it's the wrong time of day, I hope you get the point of what I'm trying to say. Superstition intrudes itself into our life in many ways, and you have many well-meaning Christians who come along. And they give you things that seem to be good. And superficially, they seem to be helpful. But if you apply the principles we looked at this afternoon, it will help to keep us safe and to keep our eyes on the right place. All right?